Support the Amigos podcast and keep the Amiga goodness flowing for just $1 a month. Visit our page at patreon.com/AmigosPodcast.
Amiga, the first personal computer that gives you a creative edge.
Amigos, the podcast about everything Amiga. Amigos is a proud member of the Throwback Network, your home for quality retro podcasts. And now, here are your hosts, Aaron Dowdy and John Bodovkar Schaller.
Hi, welcome to Amigos. I'm John.
And I'm Aaron.
And we're glad you're listening. Today we're going to talk about Zool. But first, we have some feedback this week, Aaron.
All right, great. Let's hear it.
Well, we got a message from Finland. So here we go.
Outstanding.
Greetings from Finland. I have now listened to every episode and really enjoy your podcast. I have to admit being a little surprised hearing that you're from the U.S. But your perspective is really refreshing, and actually I've never played some of the games you've covered. I did play TV sports basketball a lot. It's actually a good game, not just those pretty graphics. You mentioned the Wings remaster, but there's also the Cinemaware anthology in Steam. Have you heard about that, Aaron?
I have not.
It is. I looked it up. It's on. Like I said, it's on Steam. You can choose to play either the Amiga version or the DOS version of Cinemaware's. It seems like almost all of the Cinemaware games.
Really?
All the games run on Windows 7 and Windows 8. It's called the Cinemaware Anthology 1986 to 1991, and it includes the following titles: Defender of the Crown, SDI, The King of Chicago, Sinbad and the Throne of the Falcon. I mean, a ton of games. It's got Wings, It Came from the Desert, Parts 1 and 2, Rocket Ranger, all the TV sports games. It's $10.
What a deal.
Yeah.
And you could play the DOS or Amiga versions of those?
Yeah, you can choose at the beginning which one you want to play.
Or if they're emulated, or wonder how they did that.
I don't know, but I
think $10.
Yeah, for
what
$10.
A steal.
And the thing is, I didn't buy any of these games obviously when they came out, but I'd like to support these guys because Cinemaware is an awesome company and give some, because I'm sure some of this money makes its way back to the creators. At least I hope so.
I don't know who even owns the rights to that stuff anymore.
Yeah,
that's so awesome. I can't believe that. I did not know about that.
I had no idea, so I'm definitely going to pick this up.
Yes.
So he says it's highly recommended if you're into Cinemaware games, and he said, I just wanted to say thanks for your output so far and keep up the good work. Best regards, Yari.
Outstanding. Thanks.
Yeah,
good call,
thank you, Yari.
buddy.
And I hope I'm saying your name right. Most of my source of Nordic language comes from Skyrim.
Have you been to Finland before? I know you're a world traveler.
I've never been to any of the countries up there. I'd love to go to Finland or some of the Scandinavian countries, but never been. There's also some news that I don't know if you heard about that kind of comes just in time in that Charlie Brown sense of just in time. There are new power supplies being made, brand new, for the Amiga 500, 600, and 1200.
Oh, those bums. That's funny in so many reasons. Who's making them?
So this company, I think they're called A-Power. Okay. And here are the specs. They've got a 7-colored slow changing power LED.
Ooh.
It's much smaller than the original power supply in an Amiga. Mm-hmm. It's beige in color, so it will match your case.
That's important. Are they like? Have you seen these?
They look like. Well, they look like what I assume, a smaller version of the power supply.
Oh, so they don't look like, say, a laptop power supply.
I don't think so.
Okay.
They work on any voltage from any country. So, 100, 240, whatever, 50 or 60 hertz. They're much more powerful than the original power supply. Now, I don't know anything about electronics, but it says that it runs on 7 amps on plus 5 volts, 1 amp on plus 12, 0.1 amp on negative 12.
Well, what that probably means when it says more powerful, it's not like shooting more power in the computer. What it's doing is it would probably help for peripherals. Amiga, for example, the 500, which we're going to talk about, it had that sidecar slot in it, and you could put any Now, some of that stuff had its own power supply because they knew ahead. They're like, listen, we're not going to use the built-in, the one that came with it. We're going to need more power, so we have to plug this in with a separate power adapter. But a lot of stuff didn't, and I always heard that. Like if you put enough stuff on that side slot, you could run into trouble from not having enough juice.
Yeah.
And I was just listening to a podcast from Floppy Days who were talking about the Coco, Coco had the same sort of setup through a cartridge slot, and after you mounted like a multi-port and a bunch of other stuff, you could power that. You could run that power out. So adding more power, that's a good thing.
It also has a DC jack for something called a Plip Box Power. Do you know what that is?
A Plip box?
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't know.
I don't know either, and I should have looked it up, but I just now read that particular sentence for the first time.
Box. Maybe that's some kind of I say something stupid again, but maybe that's some sort of proprietary thing that they have. I'm not familiar with the Plip box. I don't know.
But it uses a standard IEC power cord from any printer or computer. It doesn't have any fan. It's completely quiet. It's got a neon lighted power switch, so you know when it's on or off, unlike the original.
That's real good.
It's overload protected.
Okay.
And it's also short protected. It goes into a pulse mode until the short is fixed, and then it'll auto reset when the short is fixed.
Nice.
Here's the price.
Okay.
$69.
Oh, that's not bad.
Not bad at all.
I'm just thinking how much for those that recall, we're putting together a Amiga 500, and so I didn't have a power supply for it, so I've had to go to a fella on eBay who makes a converter that will go to the Amiga from a AT style power supply, which anyone that knows anything about Amiga power supplies knows the biggest pain in the butt is the fact that they have that wacky port on the back for the power supply, that square port with the 5 pins. It's not easy to simulate, really, and you can't get them. You cannot get these things. And I didn't have a power supply. A lot of people just take and, splice at a power supply with an old one, and they're good. Didn't have one. So I thought, well, I could do this myself. But I'd like to see what someone else did. We're going to review this when we put boats together. So because I haven't even tried it yet, but I ordered this thing. But for what did you say, $69?
Mm-hmm.
That's a fair price, I think, for a quality power supply. I think that's a pretty good deal. If you consider a PC power supply is going to cost you that kind of money or more, and you're talking about a power supply for a vintage machine, that seems like a pretty reasonable deal.
I thought so too. And then there's one other website that I discovered. I can't remember how I found out about this. I was just perusing the internet. It's a website called Amiga PCB Explorer. Okay. So this is it's basically kind of a graphical or visual guide to Amiga motherboards. And what it is you'll see it's kind of a computerized drawing of a PCB of an Amiga, and it's got layouts for the A4000, the 1200, and you click on it, and then you can actually zoom in and zoom out. You can click on the different components of the motherboard. You can zoom way in to see where all the traces go and everything like that. And it seems like, if you're doing work on a motherboard, this is a really valuable thing to be able to just go ahead and, zoom in and zoom out, look at exactly what you need to see in a really high fidelity way.
Sure, that would be handy.
And that is at amigapcb.org if you want to check that out.
And you found this?
I found this.
Well done.
Yeah, it was on, I think it was on, maybe that German Amiga site, the amiganews.de.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of great stuff on there.
Yeah, you folks over in Europe for us, the resources are slim, so we've learned to pick through a lot of foreign language websites to find out information on things.
Yeah.
I've done it, and thank God for Google Translate and all this stuff, because otherwise there's not a lot of action. Like the Finnish gentleman said, there's not a lot of action over here in the States with the Amiga, and so we have to turn to you guys for support more than a little.
Would you like to comment on this week's episode? Did John and Aaron finally make their first mistake? Leave us a comment at our blog at amigospodcast.com.
All right, it's time for our hardware segment. Aaron, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to do just a little baby retrospective on the Amiga 500, since we covered the 1000 in one of our first shows. And so I thought we'd just go over the 500 a little bit, since that's sort of the premier model of the Amiga. I did a lot of research on this. It's funny. There's quite a bit of stuff out on the technical aspects of the computer, what the chipset, the peripherals, the screen modes, and whatnot. But I was looking for stuff like sales figures, for example, and that stuff's a lot harder to find and a little bit more convoluted. But I found a few things I want to share with everybody. The 500 was announced in January of '87. So if you'll recall, the 1000 was released. What was it? July of '87, I think, or July of '85, I should say. So you're talking about, it was released. So the release of this thing was somewhere in October, I believe, of '87. So not a little over 2 years in between releases of them, which is not bad. The initial price was going to be $700. That's with a monitor. The funny thing about this, and it's I never had this never occurred to me because I've had several 500s. Obviously, I own one right now that I'm going to be giving you, but the Amiga 500 was a budget 1000 effectively. You don't think about it like that now, because it seems like I always thought, okay, here's the next logical step. But I mean, if you think about it, I guess it is a budget version. They integrated it all into one unit. They eliminated some of the size of the unit. They had at this point perfected the board, smaller footprint. But in essence, I mean, the original in particular, it's a 1000 in a lot of ways. Similar chipset. The profile was smaller, so they saved money there. As I recall, Commodore owned their. Eventually, they ended up owning the people that made all their plastics, so they were essentially saving themselves money in that area. Its code name as it was being made was Rock Lobster, which a lot of people know that, which is a throwback to the B-52s, right? This thing was they directly wanted to compete with the Atari 520 ST,
right?
Which was a more budget. Now I'm not a astute in the Atari ST line. I don't know if you're more of an Atari guy than I am.
I just finished reading a retrospective of the ST in one of my old back issues of Retro Gamer magazine,
right?
And looking at the 520 ST, it looks exactly, the form factor looks exactly like a 500.
Really?
Now let me ask you this: does the 500 have an extended keypad with numpad?
The actual 500, I don't think it does.
Okay, so I guess that's one.
It's funny. There's not one here sitting in front of me. But I don't think it has. I don't recall having a keypad.
But as far as
soon as I get home, we're going to look. It's got a keypad. I can't remember. I know the 600 doesn't. So maybe the 500. I think the 500 does. I don't think about it. The 600, they just cut the keypad off. That's
right.
What it was. Yeah.
But that all-in-one form factor.
Yeah. It
really looks similar to the 520.
It looks a lot like it. Reminded me of a Commodore 128. So
yeah.
I guess maybe they were going down that road. Like I said, this thing released at various points in '87. Some places it was released as early as May, and then up to October. It was also, unlike the 1000, Commodore sold these in retail outlets, like the C64 was sold, which was probably a pretty good move. It sold a lot better than the 1000 for the obvious reasons.
That's interesting. So the Amiga 1000 was never sold through the retail channel?
They were sold. It was more of a computer, and they sold it at computer stores.
Oh, okay, but they still sold them at retail. I mean, you could still go to a store.
When I say retail outlets, I mean like a Sears, a Kmart.
So they were sold in department stores,
correct?
Stores that weren't necessarily computer stores.
Right. The early 500s, they used the same OCS chipset as the 1000. Pretty much the same everything, same chipset. The earlier versions, I didn't know this, but that the 500, any of them shipped with Kickstart or with Amiga OS 1.2. But they did. I always thought they almost all shipped with 1.3, but some apparently,
of the early ones,
right? They were stock with 512 K of memory. They were built to go up to 8 meg max, which that's a lot.
That's a lot of memory.
If you think about it,
but 512K for 87 is not very much.
No, that's actually quite a bit.
Well, compared to what was going on in the Mac scene, it wasn't. Because the original Mac, it was the second Mac that came out in 86 that had 512K.
I know. I was just listening to a show on floppy days about the Coco 3. The Coco 3 released, I think they said it released in 88. And I remember the start. amused I was because I've done this research. So it's right around the time that the 500 was out, and you could bring it to max it out at 512.
Yeah, but we're talking about two vastly different classes of machine.
That's true. That's true.
The Amiga was meant to compete with the Macintosh and the IBM PC. Now, I don't know where PCs were at that time. You'd know more about that. Did you have a PC by 87?
Yes, I had. No, I was still on the Coco because I actually had a Coco 3 before we ever got our first PC. So at that time, I was still in the Coco.
But it would be interesting to know where the PCs were at that time. Whether they were shipping with 512 or still 256.
For the longest time, I remember because I was in high school at the time, and they were that. I mean, it was. I don't think we had anywhere near 512 in our PC at school, and a lot of memory in the PC was sort of worthless too, depending on how it was all about the memory manager and what you were using.
Right.
Memory in the PC, it's a whole other story there. Of course, Amiga has its own everything memory.
Everything has issues with memory.
Like I said, pretty much the stock system, same sound chip. It had a 880K standard Amiga floppy drive. It had the usual ports you would expect on the back. The one thing it didn't have, and boy, what a pain, as we know, is that it had a video port, but it did not have a video. It had audio out. It did not have video out as a composite port. So what it did have was a video port. And the only ways you could use this thing were with a Amiga monitor, a multi-sync monitor with the cable, or the dreaded A520, which is the RF modulator thingy that Commodore put out for the Amiga. I can tell you, folks, from experience that, and I'm sure anyone that's had one of these things can identify with it. This was a horrible item. It sticks out about 8 inches off the back of straight behind the Amiga, so you can't tuck the Amiga into a little nook. It has to have a lot of leeway out. I mean, like, it's a good at least 6 inches out. And the problem with this thing is, and I've seen this happen firsthand. I was in a room when it happened. If that thing wiggled, you could literally blow up the machine with it. And it happened to a friend of mine. He had shoved his Amiga back too far, and the end of the 520 caught on the side of his desk, and it tilted and gone. Amiga gone. So that we had to take that one back to get it repaired. So this was a horrible thing. I guess again it was a cost-cutting measure to take and put that on there, but I hated it. and I think anyone that knows anything about it now would agree with you. Would agree on that. The 500 was built to be the cost version because it came out about the same time as the 2000. The 2000, of course, had the Zorro slots in it for like PC style cards. The Amiga 500 did not have that. What it did have was it had a little bit of expansion, well, not a little bit, a decent amount. It had what's called the trapdoor slot, which is the underside slot where you can stick more memory. This was referred to often as slow memory because it's a memory thing with Amigas. And also usually I know whenever I've upgraded that belly slot, you put a real-time clock in there as well. That was usually, it's a lot like the 1000 has similar.
What was the first Amiga to include a real-time clock? Was that the 1200?
To include it,
yeah.
I'd say it's probably the 2000. I can't. Don't hold me to that, but I would not be surprised if it was. But then again, it seems like I saw those real-time clock modules. I'm not sure it even came with one. I think it supported a module, but I'm not 100% sure it even came with one.
Really?
It's funny that the real-time clock didn't seem like a big deal to anyone for a long time.
Yeah.
Of course, the Cocos never had one, and
that's another thing. I know more about Macs than anything else, and the Mac, it included a real-time clock from the beginning. And that was mostly used, if you talk to old Mac heads, to make sure that their system hadn't frozen. Because if that clock was still moving, you didn't have to reach behind and turn it off and turn it back on.
Great. The Amiga did have one nice feature for a budget machine, which prolonged its life, I guess, is that the main processor was socketed. And so you could pop that out.
That is a great feature.
You can directly upgrade to a 6820 or 30. or 40 with the expansion slot and some rigmarole. Basically, you're popping the other one out. They had, of course, much like the 1000 I had, you could pop that processor out and stick weird peripherals in that socket, PC bridge boards and stuff, and that sort of thing.
Now, when you got your 500, the 500 that you're loaning me, did that one have a stock processor in it, or had it been upgraded?
I got that one with a bulk of stuff. I believe, I think it's got a stock processor. I don't recall it having anything extra on it. I got two, one of which I sold, and I don't remember which was which. So I'm not 100% sure what it's got on it. The expansions on the 5, you've got the side expansion port that was mostly used. Again, you could a lot of times you could put your SCSI cards in there, your memory expanders, a lot like we covered on a previous show.
Now, what is the difference between putting a memory expander in the side port versus adding memory through the trapdoor?
Well, that trapdoor memory was considered slow memory, and the sidecar stuff was considered fast memory. It's exactly what it sounds like.
So the system was just able to use that side door memory quicker. It was more helpful.
Well,
more beneficial.
Fast RAM is what it's called. We could do a whole show. Maybe one of these days I'll do a whole show on Amiga memory configurations, because that's a whole other realm to itself. It was crazy. Trying to configure some stuff. Now most stuff, like I said, there were a lot of memory peripherals came with switches on them, so you could turn them off effectively, because some older stuff
you wouldn't know what to do with it.
Right. The 500 had a good run. It was the best selling Amiga. It was Commodore at their peak with the Amiga. Even then, it didn't reach levels of the 64, which disappointed, Commodore. There was reasons. We could go into that too. They were just horribly promoted, and the Commodore didn't know what they had, on their hands.
Well, in some ways, Commodore was competing against itself, because they had this hugely successful platform. Even into the late 80s and 87, the C64 was still probably selling pretty well, don't you think?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, I remember hearing something on TV one time that they had sold 80,000 C64s in like something ludicrous like 95 or something, and or 94. I don't know where they even got these things. It was after Commodore was gone, but they'd been sold in like Russia or China or something like that. If you consider that, it's hard. I mean, is the C64, if not the best, is one of the all-time best-selling.
Yeah, I know. I remember reading that. And who knows if this is still true, but for a long time it was the all-time best-selling computer.
I don't know what would have caught it, because also it was around forever.
Right.
So it's hard to follow that up. And again, at that point, Commodore's business practices were their undoing. They were overpaid executives and that sort of thing. The 500 eventually was upgraded, or a new model came out, which is a 500 plus. That's when you get into the enhanced chipset. You get into a newer version of Workbench, Kickstart, the whole 9 yards. And then from there, somewhere in like I think it was like 92-ish when the 600 came out, they sort of discontinued the 5. The 600, which I won't get into too much on this show, but it was a weak replacement for the 5 in that it was basically the 5 with the few. The problem, another thing they ran into with the Amiga is that they really didn't do a lot of upgrading to their base models. I mean, it's a lot. It reminds me a lot of Atari. The Atari 400 is pretty similar to the Atari 1200 XL. I mean, in most ways, it's the same machine with the certain
just more RAM.
Yeah, exactly, and that's effectively what Commodore did. They just released the same thing over and over. The gimmick on the 600 was it had a PCMCIA card slot in it. It had an internal hard drive connector, and it was small. But I mean, if you're using the same processor and the same everything, after a while, what are you doing? It's time to move on. You're talking 7 years later. You should have had something else cooking. And then eventually the 1200 came out, which the 1200 ended up being what the 500 had originally been planned to be. They'd actually they cut out a lot of the stuff in the design to come up with the 500 that so they're sturdy. My cats tried to kill mine, and it's still kicking. I've never seen one really not work. I mean, it's amazing. They're very sturdy machines. I think part of the help is having that power supply located off the board, out of the system helps. They don't really run hot. I've plugged a line of peripherals into them, and they still keep on going. The hard drive's a nice addition. They had their quirks. Of course, the Amiga line, the biggest quirk is, and we ran into this last week, is when you hook up a couple floppy drives to them, you'd like to be able to use them. But the Amiga, I guess because of piracy, a lot of times, even if you had a multiple disc game, they would just ignore the second drive and just make you swap out the first. And so often those drives would get worn out because you use them so much. So that was a problem. Again, the video was for me, the video parts of where the Achilles heel. I was okay with the joysticks and everything else, but that's not including that ports is a pain. It's less of a pain in Europe. They can hook a SCART connector up to it. They're golden. Unfortunately, over here we don't have SCART, so we have to grin and bear it.
Right. It would be interesting to know, and I didn't look to see if the 520 ST had what kind of outputs it had, if it had the composite out, just to kind of give it parity, just because, if that was what the 500 was going up against, Amiga, Commodore must have known that, they're selling this thing that is essentially a games machine, and people want to hook it up to their TV,
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be interesting to know if the 520 did.
Well, I will say that it often came with a 520. Now, it doesn't help us now, but that was something that was often part of the deal.
We're talking about two different 520s.
Oh, you're talking about the ST. Yeah. I see. The ST had more of a, as musical as the Amiga was, I think the ST had a lot of action musically.
The ST actually had MIDI in and out. Which was insane for a computer. That was really the only computer all the way up into the 90s. People were still using Atari STs for MIDI. Fatboy Slim, remember that guy?
Yeah.
He recorded that "You've Come a Long Way, Baby" had all those hits on it on an ST. It was part of his studio get up.
Now Amigas could be MIDI'd. I will say that it was.
They just didn't. You needed a separate box for it.
It was a separate. It was a little adapter. Yeah. I think there was a way that. It seems like I read somewhere that the way the Amiga handled the stereo output was not as efficient in a studio. In a studio setting as the Atari ST, like there was something to do with the way it processed sound, or I don't know what it was, but I remember I always heard that it was better for a studio musician to use the ST. I guess maybe it's like the Mac with publishing, right?
Yeah,
it became the preferred one. Did you said you used to own an Atari ST?
I never did. I never owned an ST. In fact, I hated the ST for the longest time because as a kid, it was the thing that was pushing the 8-bits out of the way, and that was the computer that I had. So, when Antic magazine stopped calling itself Antic and started calling itself Start and just had 3 pages in the back that were for 8-bits, I just couldn't stand it because I was a kid. I couldn't afford an ST.
It's funny. We're both sort of Atari guys in a way. We ought to get an ST and fool with it just to see what it's like.
Yeah, and they're cheap. I mean, compared to Amigas, they're cheap.
Well, we got to get a Falcon.
Oh,
that way we can drop a dime.
Yeah. On it. But it's it's only fitting that we're both Atari guys in a way because of the history of the Amiga, and Jeff Miner, was that his name, that designed the Amiga, had a hand in it. So.
I think it's Jay
Miner. You're right.
Jeff
Minter is the other guy who did.
Jeff, he did Tempest 2000,
right? Yeah, which
I just picked up for the Atari Jaguar, I might add.
Awesome.
So we're speaking of the devil. I remember there was a rivalry with the ST. I used to read about it all the time in the magazines. Well, the funny thing is, I didn't know a single person with an ST because all these magazines were from Europe.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, man, this ST must be pretty good. Since we're bad-mouthing it so much in here, this thing must be really good. So I don't have any experience. The ST didn't sell as well as the Amiga did ever. I don't think.
No.
Did you know anyone that ever had one in the States?
No, I definitely heard more about the Amiga here. Now, again, it's just lucky that I have the retro gamer. This is still fresh in my mind, but the ST, it was actually the best-selling computer in Europe for either 1 or more years.
Really?
So yeah, and it was a combination of having the 16-bit processor but having a much lower price than the Amiga.
I've seen I've watched some YouTube videos of the ST and some comparisons with the Amiga. The Amiga looks like the better of the two.
It is
from a gaming perspective.
Yeah.
But I don't know how it. I will say, if we both have experience with the older Atari computers, the 400, the 800. It's a far cry from those. Yeah. They really did. They nutted up and put together something that was a whole different ball game.
Well, you know what they did was they basically didn't create the operating system from scratch. They kind of took CP/M and then they put a graphical operating system on top of it called GEM. And it's kind of funny. The name of the operating system was called TOS. You know what TOS stands for? The operating system. And you know, it didn't really seem like it had the soul of the Amiga, and a lot of the ports were just kind of lazy. The games that we've played on here, you know, looking at the ST versions, just not as good. And you know, part of it, I'm sure, is the way that the Amiga was able to process graphics, I think, was better than the ST. But part of it, I think, was just, you know, they're like, well, it's on the Amiga, let's just pop it over to the ST and see how it does.
Yeah, they must have been fairly decent, easy to port back and forth. Did the of course, this is not an ST show, but did the Atari ST have Atari style joystick ports on it, or did they have something else?
Boy, you know, that's a great question. I want to say they did, because I don't recall ever seeing any ST-specific joysticks at, you know, Classic Gaming Expo or anything like that.
You're right. I don't remember seeing like that either.
So, but tune in to our next podcast as soon as when we finish up the Amiga, where we explore the Atari ST and the Coco 3.
Well, maybe we have to have once we get our ST, we'll have to have a battle.
Yeah.
And see which one we'll.
All right. Well, that was a great segment, Aaron. Let's move on to.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the game.
Are you enjoying the Amigos podcast? If so, please take a moment to write us a review on iTunes. iTunes is how most people discover podcasts, and by writing a review, you'll help us get to the top of the retro gaming and computing section. Thanks!
All right, this week's game is Zool, Ninja of the Nth Dimension.
It's my favorite ninja game, allegedly.
Unbeknownst to you. So Zool is a platform game originally produced for the Amiga by Gremlin Graphics in 1992. It was later ported to several other platforms and followed by Zool 2 in 1993. So Zool was originally developed and intended as a rival to Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's so it's very easy to see when, you know, if you played Zool, what they were going for. The game was heavily hyped upon its initial release. I mean, it was everywhere. They the publisher, I actually didn't write down who published it. Do you have that down? Maybe, do you think Gremlin Graphics published it also?
I'm not 100% sure. I knew Gremlin, obviously, because there's the big splash screen and chin-ups and all that junk on there.
But I guess that they sent out, you know, full-page ads to all the magazines.
I know when it came out. I remember when it came out, and it was a big deal. There was a lot of hype.
Yeah, and so it also was bundled with the newly launched Amiga 1200. But it wasn't.
Was it out? It had to have been out before that, though, wasn't it? Did they release like a?
It's possible that they released
version,
it.
I believe.
Well, yeah. And what happened was this is just another, you know, misstep. They bundled it with the 1200, or maybe it wasn't a misstep, and then they later released the AGA version separately. So they got you twice, you know.
That's the one I played, by the way, the
AGA version.
Yeah. Obviously.
So Zool was also ported to a ton of other stuff.
I was surprised. I looked over the ports. I was like, I don't even know what this is.
Yeah. So, you know, you got your usuals, the ST, the Game Boy, Mega Drive,
the
Genesis.
Game Boy, that's not a usual. That's bizarre. An Amiga port to the Game Boy? That can only happen a few times.
I think about, you know, the Addams Family.
Well, yeah.
Like that. Master System, Game Gear, CD32 had a version.
The Master System.
Yeah.
I didn't even pay attention to that. That'd be wacky.
The Acorn Archimedes.
That's the one that caught my attention. Is that a rare machine?
Well, the Acorn it's a British PC.
Yeah, but the Archimedes.
But I have no idea.
Isn't that
what
like the jazzed up Acorn?
Maybe that's what it is.
We didn't have Jack Squad over here from Acorn, guys. No. So I'm not gonna lie to you.
It wasn't even like the ZX Spectrum, which was rebranded as the Timex Sinclair.
Yeah, that one we knew about. The Acorn, I've never laid eyes on one.
Yeah, and then it was also developed for arcades. Did you know that?
Again, it seems like something I may have picked up way back in the day, but it's not something I could have told you today. No.
Now the CD32 version has the original Red Book audio tracks and also has the option to have both sound effects and music.
I wasn't fond. I turned down the audio, the Red Book audio tracks on that.
That and the Acorn Archimedes version are the only two incarnations to have the ability to have both sound effects and music.
I'm going to look up this Archimedes. I'm pretty sure that was like a top shelf Acorn computer. It'd have to be just to have a CD, just have the ability to play Red Book CD ROMs.
Now here's something that I thought was funny because this brings me back to my own youth. 2 young adult novels were produced based on the games entitled Cool Zool and Zool Rules, which were released in February 1995.
Catchy.
Which seems like a long time after the release of the game. I can't imagine too many kids were still talking about Zool on the playground in 1995. I can't imagine
someone pried a story out of this that could fill 2 books.
But it's funny because when I was a kid, my mom used to limit my video gaming time, and so I was instead what I would do is I'd fill my time reading. Are you familiar with the Worlds of Power series?
I'm not.
These are books that were written for NES games. Like there's one about Castlevania, one about Metal Gear.
Geez. Well, there you go.
And they are the cheesiest, probably looking back on it, the worst books, but I loved them when I was a kid.
Maybe you should pick these up.
I might go on eBay and see how much they're going for.
Lots, I'd wager.
Maybe we can do a live reading.
Oh boy,
on the podcast.
That'll bring in the users.
Andy Kaufman style.
Oh my gosh.
Zool had some firsts. It was the very first Amiga game to feature heavy product placement.
No kidding.
And by heavy,
they're not lying.
Yeah, they're not lying.
Although, now, what year did Super Frog come out? I can't remember. Was it 93? So it must have been shortly thereafter. Because of course that had the energy drink in it.
Yeah. Lucozade or something like that. But of course, liberally spread throughout the levels were the lollipops, the Chupa Chups lollipops and logos. Now,
have you ever had any of those?
We sold them for fundraisers when I was in school, and they're not very good. I don't like them very much.
I've had them. In fact, I remember going to the store one time and seeing some. I was like, look, it's a thing from Zool. Because at the time I saw that and I was like, I'd never heard of that. So I don't remember
seeing them that early. Maybe they started out there. Do you know who designed the Chupa Chup logo?
Should I?
Get ready to have your mind blown.
Who?
Salvador Dali.
Whoa. Yeah. Holy, they've been around for a while then, yeah?
Well, Dali just died. I mean, he died in like the 90s.
Right, but I mean, I'm guessing that
when he was on his deathbed, he was just,
he was just designing stuff. No, I mean, I'm guessing they were around for surely they weren't just something that popped up in the 90s and got in a video game.
I don't know.
Aren't they I thought they were like a UK or European superpower of candy.
Yeah. Well, it's not like they're Cadbury. I mean, like, you don't see that anywhere else but on the lollipops. Well, at least in England, I didn't see any of it. But yet again, that would be something that I probably should have researched. But,
well done, Boat.
Yeah. But I got the Dolly thing. I thought that was cool.
That's wow. Yeah. What can I say? So, in essence, Salvador Dali had a hand in Zool. I wonder if he's mentioned in the novels anyway. Maybe he did the artwork for the cover.
But we're going to have to check it out. Now, the game caused confusion right off the bat because many of the reviewers that played the game before Zool came out described Zool as an ant.
Right.
Well, it turns out that Gremlin had to issue a press release saying that Zool is actually not an ant, but he is the leader of a body representing ants.
I thought he was an ant too.
And they're complaining.
Now say that. Wait a minute. Say that again. They said what now?
Okay. So Gremlins later issued a press release claiming to be
that in itself is ludicrous.
Yeah, claiming that he is a leader of a body, like a group of people that represent ants that are complaining about the misrepresentation of their hardworking and gentle species.
But he's not an ant. What is he?
He's the leader of a body. I have no idea what Zool is.
I love to see this. Has anyone got the video of this press conference?
I can just see. I'm picturing like an NFL coach, in front of. He's not an ant.
I will say this: that, in this political season in America, that sounds like a political answer to a question. He is. That's so ludicrous and makes no sense. I always thought he was an ant. I swear to God. Why did they not want him to be an ant?
Right. That's what I want to know. It's not like that would make him any less cool. So
that's impossible.
Yeah. But this was definitely, developed to be the Amiga's Sonic or Mario. They needed a big platform mascot to drive sales. The people that owned Amigas were clamoring for that because they were feeling jealous. And it's plainly obvious from anyone who's ever played any Sonic or Mario game that this is not that game.
No, this reminds me. It's so much. No, again, I think this is better, but reminded me so much of Super Frog in the fact that someone looked at some platformers, they got the general mechanics down from some platform. Now this has some clever stuff in it. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, you can't just make your guy real fast and then throw him into a level. These levels do not tolerate running amok like Sonic. This is a hard game, in my opinion. Yeah. It was super tough.
Yeah, definitely super difficult, and you can move quickly, but you're going to run into stuff and you're going to die.
Yeah.
I also played the AJA version. It's limited by the one button of the Amiga controller. You have to press up to jump, which, coming from a console perspective like me, just makes it really difficult to play.
This wasn't as hard for me to get around as Super Frog.
Really?
I thought this was a little easy. Don't get me wrong. I understand what your perspective, and it is a jump button, and it wouldn't hurt. But I was able to get around a little bit better. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because the guy was a little bit bigger. I think that helped. Yeah. You could see him a little bit better. It was doesn't mean I was better at this than Super Frog, because this was, like I said, it was at least as hard as Super Frog and maybe harder. It was awful. Maybe I just suck at it. I don't know. We'll find out. I thought there were some clever touches in it. It's super long. I can tell you I did not beat the game, but I did watch someone beat it so I could get a taste of all the levels. It's a long game. It's really long. A lot of it, though, like, for example, you've got, about 5 or 6 levels in this thing. You would see every bit of the same stuff over and over and over again.
It's not like you got so many discrete places. That was one thing that I thought Super Frog was really cool about. Each level is completely different than the one before. These
levels are different, but it's just that the levels just go on for forever. Mm-hmm. You've got the first level, which is Sweet World. Right, it's all candies and stuff. Your candy donuts are shooting at you. You've got Fruit World, you've got Music World, and you've got Toy World, Fun Fair World, and Tool World. These are not in the correct order. I got the Music World. I don't know, did you get that far?
I didn't make it past Candy World. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Candy World. A lot of people hate Candy World. I think it's too busy.
There's a lot. They really went overboard with the collectibles. As far as having the candy, it just seems like everywhere you jump, it's just you run into millions of pieces of candy.
And the thing is, only a little bit. Like I knew I would get things, but I wasn't even sure what they were. I had to look them up. I don't know if you looked at, or maybe you knew right away. You can get a bomb. It kills everything on the screen. You get this weird thing that splits you in two.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's a cool effect.
But it doesn't really help.
Well, you shoot more.
Yeah.
You get a thing that helps you jump or climb, and because you kind of climb and jump. What was the game, Strider, that did that same sort of thing? I actually liked that aspect of the game.
I'll tell you, I almost stopped playing the game immediately because I couldn't make it past that first section. This is the very beginning of the game where you have to jump, attach yourself to the wall, jump off, and use your momentum as you jump off to get to the top of the cliff.
That was a repeating element.
Yeah. Physics-wise, it makes no sense. And I was thinking, well, there's no way they'll let you do that because you can't jump off of something and rise above the thing you're jumping off. Unless you're playing Zool, unless you're
a ninja that represents the body of ants.
Yeah.
But there's a shield, there's a time bonus, and there's an extra life. But that much said, so you've got what 6 things there, 5 things. There's so much collectible crud everywhere. There's no way you can even tell what the heck you're getting. It's just, it's everywhere. It's thick, like you said. And when you have too much, it's too much. It's too much. The leaping thing, I thought it was cute. Again, stridery.
Mm-hmm.
And
Strider-esque.
A couple other games use that element. I like that element, but again, they didn't do any favors. And the positioning of spikes and stuff. Another game with these damn spikes. And something that would bother me was getting shot from something off screen. That would happen a lot. This is the kind of game, and I don't want to sit here and stroke the ego of Nintendo, but when they do a platformer, and they're really good platformers, Addams Family, which is a different sort of platformer altogether, but when you don't feel like you're getting a fair shake, and you combine that with the fact that your control's a little iffy, and you combine that with the just poor level design.
And the length of the level design.
The level is too long, you're right. The end boss, did you get to the end boss?
I did get to the end boss.
You did?
That's where I died.
The big bee.
Yep.
The big turbo bee. I managed to beat him using all my lives, but I beat him one time. Each world has an end boss in it. This giant bumblebee is that one. The music world has a big flying shooting guitar. I had seen that in my youth. Those days of my ability to get there were over, but I'd seen him. In the fruit world, there's a big banana that shoots at you and an alarm clock that kind of hops around. The tool world, there's a big... Actually, the tool world, the boss is pretty clever. You're on the ground, and there's a big, huge, like pneumatic drill that's coming down, and it pounds away at the ground, and you just kind of dodge back and forth till eventually it just digs all the way through and just falls in this pit.
Kind of like the end of Super Mario Brothers 3.
Yeah. The toy world has a big kind of a robot-y looking thing. I'm not sure, let me see what I describe this guy as. He was weird. It's just a weird ball looking. It was a robot thing. The fairground world, which is the last level, you'll never get to get there. No one. I don't know who. The guy I watched the video of, he got there, but God bless, more power to him. Had this weird. It was a clown with an eye stalk and a long tongue and an eyeball on the end of his tongue.
Wow.
And you fight this. And spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't beat this, which is everyone, the game came out a long time ago, so I don't feel too bad about dropping a spoiler. At the end of the game, you see a ship. It flies off. Zool gets out and greets his family, his wife, presumably, and these two little baby Zools that are in diapers, which I thought was cute. And you get a message, and the message is something here. I wrote it down. Well done. Zool has returned to his homeland and his loving family. Thank you. That's what it says. And then that's the end of the game. And also, did you know about the bonus level that you can get to from the second level? Which I didn't know this either until I did some research.
No idea.
On the second level, on the music level, I say second level, but the first level has 6 parts. Second level. There's a big piano you run across, and when you run across it, it's like those notes at the store. You can play a little tune. If you play a certain set of notes, you go to a shooting level. It's like a bonus level where you're in a ship, and it's like it's sort of like an R-type.
Yeah.
It didn't look that good.
Oh. Now
I have gotten to that again when I was younger, accidentally. It is what it is.
It's neat that it's in there, though.
It is. Another thing I saw I think it was the last level, which I thought was amusing. Oh, another thing on the I think it was the tool level. It's hammers are chasing you around, and you can get on this. There's those things you see at the carnival. That you hit the thing that goes up and dings a bell.
Yeah.
You can stand, if you stand in the right spot and the hammer comes down, it'll shoot you up in the air.
Oh, that's cool.
Which I thought was funny. And the best part, and I will give him credit on this is very clever. Zool's running around and he comes across this gigantic arcade machine of Zool. And he's on the control panel, and on the screen you see Zool running, and these officers are coming at him. And if you run back and forth onto the arcade buttons, he'll make him jump.
Huh.
And so you can actually play the game with your little Zool.
That's pretty cool.
I thought that was pretty cool. That was on the toy level that you could do that. So it's not like this game didn't have any charm. It's just level design, controls. That's what it lacked. It wasn't bad. It's still a fun game. I enjoyed it. But it's not one I would rush back to play again, I don't think.
I kind of feel the same way. Being able to look at it with some hindsight and knowing what it was trying to do and what it was trying to be, helps it a little bit because you see what they're reaching for, but when you've got levels that are this long and it's this frustrating to play because of, like you said, the cheap shots, it just doesn't give you a lot of incentive to run back and keep playing.
Right, and if you play a Mario or a Sonic, for example, these two games, it's not just even if the level design was poor, the placement of the bad guys and the obstacles, it's depressing to play this game. It's just, I felt so helpless in some places, and you just feel like I'm never going to get
even
past
when
this.
You have power-ups, you never feel particularly powerful. Like if you've got a fire flower in Super Mario Brothers, you feel like you can pick off the enemies. If you've got an invincibility star, you feel like you're running. You feel good about yourself. Even when you get that thing that splits you in two, I mean, you shoot faster, but I was dying.
It's also sort
just
of
as often
discombobulating.
Yeah, at first I thought it was invincibility. I was running into stuff, and of course I died immediately.
And this game will kill you in heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you have, 3 hit points, that doesn't mean you're gone.
Right.
So overall, again, and I recall this game got really good reviews.
It did. It scored in the 90s in most magazines.
In my opinion, this isn't even in the same ballpark as Adam's Family in terms of a solid platform.
No.
It's definitely in the more of the realm of Super Frog.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. My kid liked it. He played it quite a bit, and I know that it got released on a million different things.
Now, so would you say overall you prefer this game to Super Frog?
Super Frog had a lot of character. I like that. Super Frog's a better character than this ninja ant or non-ant from the Nth Dimension. What even is that? We don't even know. You remember Poochie on The Simpsons? They tried to make him the super cool hip character with all the, he was a Rastafarian surfer.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what this reminds me of. This is when mascots were coming out of the woodwork.
Yep. 92 was that was Super Mario World. That was Sonic 2.
You had those guys, but you had all these other, the Bat. There was a Bat guy that was a character, and you had Conker, and you had all these other guys.
The 90s. Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah.
All
you had a zillion of them. So this guy's just another guy with another. If you saw this on a console, for example, you'd be like, there's another one, which you could see this on a console.
Yeah.
So I guess it'd be my thing.
It didn't help either that I was reading some about the ports to the 16-bit systems, and I guess the Genesis and Super Nintendo ports they have different levels, smaller graphics and bosses. The Super Nintendo port apparently is very buggy and has very low horizontal resolution and makes the collision just much more of a factor, and it's just a slower game overall. So I don't think Zool made Super Nintendo owners look twice at the Amiga.
Did you? Yeah. Did you have a glance at the sequel? It did get a sequel.
I did play a little bit of it.
It seemed like more of the same to me.
Yeah, for
except with
reason,
a chick non-ant.
Yeah, I erased it from my notes. I wrote down a couple things about it, but yeah, it looked like more of the same. The graphics were slightly better, I thought, but
this is one game I actually have for the Jag.
Really?
I picked it up a while back, and the Jag version of all the Jag games, the Atari Jaguar. It stands out pretty good on the Jag if you consider the alternative.
Right.
On the Jag.
What was Bubsy? It was a Bubsy 3D.
The Jag didn't have much, so I thought it was a win. But again, that's where it stopped. And the thing is, Gremlin is they do a lot of good stuff. And this isn't crap. Again, I know I don't want to say.
What else did Gremlin do?
I think they did the Lotus series, which is highly thought of on the Amiga.
I think you're right, because they were talking about how something about the Zool soundtrack was similar. Maybe that was Lemmings. No, because Gremlin didn't do it. Mm-hmm. All these games are running together.
I'm pretty sure that Gremlin did the Lotus,
the racing series.
Lotus is which we need to touch on that sometime. Lotus is a great series. But overall, I'm going to give it a thumbs in the middle, slightly down. I don't know, it's a 55%.
Yeah, it's a solid thumbs down for me. If you want to play a platformer, just look for another one. I'm sure there's one that's better.
This is worth a look. The graphics are pretty good on the Amiga. I thought that was a nice thing, and they scroll nicely, but
yeah. I feel like if I much prefer Super Frog. I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I love the hidden areas in Super Frog. I think that's a nice touch. It's not as busy. There's still stuff, you got the fruit and the coins and stuff, but it just doesn't seem as full of junk.
Although it's close. That's one thing they had in common, too. Just lots of stuff to get.
And I think that this game suffers from the first level being almost kind of vomit-inducing with the amount of sugary sweetness that's in it. And so it really turned me off. If it would have started on a different level, once I see some of these other levels when we run through it, maybe I'll think differently. But I really liked the first level of the Super Frog game. The outdoor setting. I thought was kind of neat.
It's funny because I hear that that's one thing I read over and over and over when I was doing some research and looking at forums and stuff, is that people just don't like that first level the way it looks. It's funny, as a kid I thought, man, this is a pretty good looking first level. And I thought the music level, which is the next one, was pretty cool looking too. And I really, that's as far as into the game as I got. But I can see where it's very busy, and with the added bonus of all the crap, probably too much.
And if they would have had some sort of like the secret areas I love in Super Frog, where you can tunnel in, and
that is something that was nice in there.
So, but anyway, it's a thumbs down for me, but I guess it's kind of a thumbs part way down, because there are some redeeming qualities, but I'd play something else. Score time. So, Aaron, what'd you get on this one?
I hung around for a whopping 127,663, which is part of the way through the music world.
Yeah, you doubled my score. And I thought I played this a pretty good bit, but I was just terrible at it, apparently. I got 63,456.
Did you say you never got off the first level?
I got to the last guy on the first level.
He's tough. That bee is tough.
Yeah.
And he charges at you. You're boned. I don't know. Couldn't find any pattern to not get hit at all.
Yeah.
I just had to go in there at full strength, and it took me a while.
Care of business.
Oh, well, I got to the second level 2 or 3 times of all the times I played. So, But yes, once again, I am your master.
You're victorious. All right. Well, let's talk about what game we're going to play next week. I've got a special treat for you, because I know what a soccer fan you are.
Oh, man. I sure love me some. Wait a minute, what? Soccer?
Football.
Oh, gee,
Have you seen on NFL games how they're spelling football?
F-U-T.
Yeah, like they spell it.
That's the way they spell it in Europe, right?
Yeah. So, but anyway, I think we should do Kickoff 2 next week.
Kickoff 2.
Yeah.
Not Sensible Soccer?
Not Sensible Soccer. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
On November 7th and 8th, 2015, the 15th Kickoff 2 World Cup is taking place in Dublin, Ireland.
Really?
Where the best kickoff players are gathering for 2 days of goal-scoring action. And they're expecting players from all across Europe. If you want to check it out, you can go to www.kickoff2worldcup.com. So to celebrate the World Cup, I thought maybe we should do it. It's kind of a preliminary.
Okay, now let me ask you. You said it was the 15th annual. Is what you just said on that?
Yeah, the 15th.
So they started playing Kickoff 2 presumably 8 to 10 years after it was released.
Right.
for their tournament. Someone thought, Kickoff 2 was a good game. It's the year 2000. What the hell?
Exactly.
Fire that sucker up.
So, but, I went on Lemon Amiga and checked it out, and it turns out that a lot of people prefer Kickoff 2 to Sensible Soccer.
Oh, my. I bet this is a big throwdown overseas.
I'm sure. Now, apparently the learning curve to Kickoff 2 is a little bit more steep.
Oh,
but
great.
Since we're playing each other, we'll both be equally terrible.
Do you know anything about soccer at all?
I know that I don't understand offsides.
Is it like hockey?
Yeah, which I don't understand that either.
So we're gonna be failing a lot, I'm guessing.
But I did play actually when the XBLA version of Sensible Soccer came out. I played that quite a bit, and I enjoyed it. I like a good soccer game. I played the games on the Genesis. I'm not a huge soccer fan. Just not. Mostly just because I didn't grow up watching it. I think with any sport, if you grow up watching it, you have part of a nostalgia of growing up watching a specific team, and if you don't have that, it's harder to get into. What do you think about that? Do you agree with that? I mean, obviously, you didn't grow up watching MMA and you like that now, but you grew up watching boxing and...
It's maybe our European fans... I'm not the biggest soccer fan, and by that I mean I don't like soccer at all, but hear me out before you just turn off the thing. Soccer is not a tradition in the States, obviously. That everywhere else on earth it is, but not here. And probably this is a speech best saved for the show, but I'll just end it by saying they've tried for 20 years to shove soccer down our throats over here to get us to watch it. And so it's not necessarily have anything against the game, but I don't like the fact that they've been trying to beat us down to watch this for so long. It is what it is. Either like it or you don't, but it gets tiresome after a while. That much said, I do like me a good soccer game now and again. I've played some soccer games on the Neo Geo. I believe they have one on there that I've played, and I remember playing an EA one. So heck, I'll give it a whirl. All I know about soccer is I think Pele's pretty cool, and that's about the extent of my knowledge about it.
You're not going to watch the DC United this weekend?
Don't know what those are.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Until next time, adios.